Well, we're going to be in Proverbs chapter 4. So if you brought a Bible, meet me in Proverbs. And if you need a Bible, there's some paperback ones underneath the seats there in front of you. The table of contents will point you to Proverbs. And if you open to the middle of the Bible, you're probably going to land close to Proverbs. If you land in Psalms, just keep going a little bit to the right and you'll hit Proverbs. We're going to be in chapter 4. We're going to go verse 10 through 27, Proverbs 4, verse 10 through 27. And it'll help you to be able to read along with us today. So if you didn't bring a Bible, grab one of those underneath the seat in front of you and read along with us. Proverbs chapter 4, beginning in verse 10. One of the things that amazes me about traveling in airplanes is that when you're up in the air, it doesn't really feel like you're moving. Like taking off, you kind of see how fast you're going, and sometimes when you're landing, you're like, we're coming in kind of hot. I hope this thing stops. But you can feel how fast you're going when you're coming in. But when you're up there at what they call cruising altitude, you're going 500 to 600 miles an hour, but it doesn't feel like that at all. In fact, if you sit by the window, you can see the ground, and the ground just looks like it's kind of creeping by. So maybe you're moving kind of slow is what it feels like. You're actually going 600 miles an hour. And the only time you can get some perspective on how fast you're actually going is if another plane passes you going in the other direction. Hopefully not too close, but it passes you going in the other direction. And it's hauling. And you look at that plane and you're like, man, that thing is hauling. We must be going that fast too. You ever experienced that? It's amazing. You feel like you're just sitting still. You're actually hurtling through the sky. So today is part 3 in our series in the book of Proverbs. Proverbs was compiled by Solomon, who was the third king of Israel, and he was considered to be the wisest person in the ancient world. He wrote a lot of Proverbs, and then some of it he compiled, or he did what we today call, he curated it. He carefully curated it from other sources of wisdom, and he said, this is God's wisdom, and he compiled, and he wrote, and he compiled, he curated this book called Proverbs, and it was used to train young men and women in Israel. He put it together as like a training manual for young men and women, and the assumption of Proverbs is that life and a lot of the choices and the decisions we have to make that have a moral dimension to them, or they have a discernment dimension to them, or they have kind of like a figuring out the best way to go dimension to them. A lot of the decisions and choices we have to make are complicated. They're not obvious, but we all start out life as what Proverbs calls simple. We learned what that means last week. The simple are just those who aren't very sophisticated, and they're a little bit naive, and they're prone to being led and misled, and we all start life that way. We all start life simple, and so we need a course of training in order to learn how to navigate all the complexities of life. And so we're going to spend some time this year in the book of Proverbs, and we're taking a few weeks at the front of the year to just establish and learn the big worldview like that Proverbs has. Like, well, how does Proverbs just look at life, and what does Proverbs assume is true about life and about the way the world works that you've also got to assume is true in order to live a life of meaning and purpose? In fact, this is how all human knowledge works. All human knowledge works like this. You assume some things are true. You learn some things, and then you assume they're true, and based on those assumptions, you can then go on and learn and discover other things. So this is how scientific knowledge develops, for example. Once you learn a law of nature, you then assume that's true, and then you go on to invent and discover and to develop other things. So every time I get into an airplane, I don't study the laws of aerodynamics. I don't even understand them, to be honest with you. But the pilots don't restudy and relearn the laws of aerodynamics. They just assume that those laws of aerodynamics are just as true today as they were yesterday, as they were 1,000 years ago before they were discovered, and they put those into practice, and we zoom through the sky. Well, that's kind of how Proverbs works. Proverbs ask, what should you assume is true about how life works? And assuming that's true, you can then go on to build a life of meaning and purpose based on those assumptions. Now, the assumption we're going to learn today goes like this. Life is in motion, and you are in motion. We're going to call this the principle of motion. Your life is going somewhere, and you are becoming someone. Your life is in process of going somewhere. It's headed toward a destination, and you are becoming someone. You are headed toward a destination. And then we can just add this, even if you don't feel like it. You ever felt like your life isn't going anywhere? I've often felt like my life is stuck. Like, I'm just stuck. I'm just a pastor of a church in Denver who just does the same thing week in, week out. You know that little small talk question that I sometimes voiced on people? I probably did it to several of you this morning. I'm like, anything big going on in your life? Anything new going on in your life? And I'm like, no, I'm not going anywhere. You ever feel like your life's not going anywhere? Proverbs says you can always assume your life is going somewhere, even if you don't feel like it's going somewhere, and you're becoming someone. Even more importantly than like your life going somewhere, you are becoming a certain kind of person. And every day is a step and a step and a step and a step closer to where you're going, and every day you are taking a step and a step and a step and a step and a step to become someone. You're always on your way somewhere, and you're always becoming someone. That's the principle of motion. Proverbs assumes it's true. And today, Solomon, building on that assumption, is going to teach us this. Not only can you assume that you're on your way somewhere and that you're becoming someone, you can know where you're on your way to, and you can know who you're becoming if you learn another principle that he's teaching in Proverbs chapter 4. So if you have a Bible open, read with me, and let's read one paragraph which goes from verse 10 through verse 19. We'll talk about it a little bit, and then we'll come and we'll read the second paragraph, which goes from verse 20 to verse 27. It goes like this. Hear, my son, and accept my words, that the years of your life may be many. I have taught you the way of wisdom. I have led you in the paths of uprightness. When you walk, your step will not be hampered, and if you run, you will not stumble. Keep hold of instruction. Do not let go. Guard her, for she is your life. Do not enter the path of the wicked, and do not walk in the way of the evil. Avoid it. Do not go on it. Turn away from it and pass on. For they cannot sleep unless they have done wrong. They are robbed of sleep unless they have made someone stumble. For they eat the bread of wickedness, they drink the wine of violence. But the path of the righteous is like the light of dawn, which shines brighter and brighter until full day. The way of the wicked is like deep darkness. They do not know over what they stumble. And the main thing Proverbs is teaching here, and that Solomon is teaching here, is this word, the path. You hear this word, the path and the way, the path and the way, the path and the way. It's two different Hebrew words which really mean the same thing. They mean a well-worn, well-traveled path. Like in the ancient world, paths that literally got you from one place to another were traveled by foot, and they were traveled by animals, and they were traveled by chariots sometimes, and they became hard-packed dirt. You don't actually have to go back to the ancient world to discover this. When the Western America was settled, the way it was first settled, before we built the railroad, the way it was settled was wagon trains came from the east to the west. And one of these famous wagon trails was called the Oregon Trail. I know this because I was raised by a father who kind of has like a self-taught PhD in the history of the settling of the West. And so a couple of summers ago, we were driving from Montana to Colorado, and we were passing through Wyoming, and in the middle of nowhere in Wyoming, where there shouldn't even have been an exit because there was nothing to exit to, my dad took an exit off I-25, and he started driving east, and I said, what are we doing? And he said, if we go 30 miles this way, we're going to be able to see some old Oregon Trail wagon ruts. And I was like, woohoo! And sure enough, we drove 30 miles out of the way, which means you have to drive 30 miles to get back on the way. We drove 30 miles out of the way. We ended up giving a couple of hours of our life to this, and we drove down a dirt road and through a little small town and down another dirt road and up a hill, and guess what we found? There was these ruts about the size of this width right here, and they were dug out in the ground. It looked like hard-packed concrete, and for about 30 years, in the mid-1800s, for about 30 years, wagon trains had come through there from the east on their way to Oregon. And it had left this hard-packed path. And it was well-worn, it was well-traveled. And then one day someone built the Union Pacific Railroad, and everyone was like, that's a better path. And they abandoned the Oregon Trail. But that's what we saw. It's a well-worn path. It's like a proven path. It's like a path that you know where it's taking you. Now, what Proverbs is teaching us is that you're always in motion, you're always going somewhere, you're always becoming someone, and you're always on a path. There's two paths. There's a path of wisdom and there's a path of foolishness. Now, here's why this is so important when Solomon talks about the path, because the Your destination, where you are going and where you wind up, is determined by the path that you're on. So the principle of motion says you're always in motion, you're always going somewhere, and the principle of the path says, and you always wind up wherever the path you're on takes you. And then we could add this. The path takes you somewhere. Your intentions don't take you somewhere. Your wishes don't take you somewhere. Your hopes and your dreams don't take you somewhere. The path you're on determines where you wind up. The path wins. Now, you know this. We have a path that runs through Colorado now called I-70. But there's actually two I-70s. There's one that travels west and there's one that travels east. And they wind up in two radically different places. So if tomorrow morning you're like, it's MLK Day and you have the day off and you're gonna go skiing, and you load up your skis and you load up your boots and your car and you head out east on I-70, it doesn't matter how much you intend to go skiing, doesn't matter how much you want to go skiing, doesn't matter how good you are at skiing, doesn't matter how sincere of a skier you are, you're not going skiing. You know where you're gonna wind up? You're gonna wind up in a place called Colby, Kansas, and there's a big truck stop there called the Oasis of the Plains, and that's gonna be the best thing you experience if you go on that. That's the best thing on that path, but if you go, they got a Starbucks, they got a Quiznos, and they got palm trees right in the middle of Kansas. It's a miracle. It's a miracle. Come to think of it, it's pretty amazing. It's pretty amazing. I have a great friend in Kansas City, and we're always joking like, hey, you want to just meet at the Colby? You want to meet at the Oasis of the Plains? But if you go west, you'll wind up in a far more enchanted land where you can ski. The path is going to determine where you wind up. So you should always assume that you're in motion, and you should ask, what path am I in motion on? This is what Proverbs is teaching. The wise person thinks about what path they're on. Here's what verse 26 will say when we read it. Ponder the path of your feet, then all your ways will be sure. Think about, consider, what path are you on? Now, here's why this is so crucial. You've probably all had this experience where someone's telling you like a horror story, like, here's what happened, and it's awful, and life has kind of gone sideways for me, and here's why. And they're telling you the story, like, he did this, and then I did this, and then he did this, and I said this, and then we kind of did this for a while. And as they're telling the story, you're thinking, like, I know how this story ends before they give you the conclusion. And the reason you know how it ends is because you actually intuitively understand the principle of the path. They didn't want to wind up there, but the path just took them there. And it's easy to see this a lot of times in other people, but it's sometimes really hard to see it in ourselves. And what distinguishes wise people is that they can't just see what the path that other people are on. They can actually ponder their own path. They can begin to discern what path they're on. They can put this principle to work, not just in critiquing other people's lives. They can begin to put this principle to work in their own lives. Now, if we're a normal crowd, and you guys look fairly normal, if we're a normal crowd, many of us probably have some good desires and some noble intentions. Like we have some hopes and some dreams and some desires that are good. And we have some intentions and we have some things we want for our lives that are like God put those desires there. They are good. And yet, those desires will be trumped by the path we're on, because the path always wins. So, some of us would say, my desire is to be married to a godly man or a godly woman. But the path I'm on is I go out with just like whoever. Some of us would say like, man, I want to be more joyful and more happy as I get older. Like I can actually testify to this. Somehow this week I got on a rabbit hole. I was actually looking for an old picture on Facebook. You know, like Facebook's the only place I keep pictures anymore. And really, I don't keep pictures. It's like where my mom keeps pictures of me, really. And so I was looking for like an old picture on Facebook. And as I was digging around on Facebook for this old picture, I kept seeing pictures from 10, 12 years ago of me. And I thought, you know what? I'm a different person today than I was back then. I'm like more joyful, I'm more happy, I'm more content. That's a path that's a destination many of us want to wind up in. And yet, if your path is like every day I'm nursing some bitterness or some self-pity, if every day I'm nursing some anger, that's not a path that's going to take you to joy and contentment as you get older. Some of us would go, hey man, I want to just be a blessing to other people. Like I want to be a kind of person who's just a life-giving person to other people, but I also have a win-at-all-cost attitude at work and in business. Guess what? You're not on a path that's going to take you where you want to go. If you're married, you might go, hey, I want to be one of those couples that when we get older, we're more in love with each other than even when we were young and spry and beautiful. And there's a path that will take you there. There is a well-worn path that you can travel that will get you there. You know what that path always includes for people who are old and married? It includes that they've and happy. It includes that they've like had significant challenges in their marriage, and they chose to get some help. They chose to work through those. Like every older couple I talk to that is really, really joyful in their marriage, they're more in love. They're more in love in their 70s than they were in their 20s. They've all traveled that path. They've all gone, man, we had some significant challenges. We had to work through those. We had to get some help. We had to get some counseling. It was a season where we really had to dig in. They didn't travel the path of like, I'm just going to put my head down and pretend that there's not an issue. It's not the path they traveled. So the path always takes you somewhere. You always wind up where the path you're on goes, not just where you kind of want to wind up. Now, one more thing about a path. How do you move down a path? Step by step. You move down a path, one step at a time, one wheel turn at a time. You move down a path gradually. So there's actually an emphasis here on the gradual unfolding nature of a path. That's what Solomon is emphasizing here in chapter 4. Look at verse 14. He says this, do not enter the path of the wicked and do not walk in the way of the evil. Avoid it, do not go on it, turn away from it and pass on by. For they cannot sleep unless they have done wrong. They are robbed of sleep unless they have made someone stumble. For they eat the bread of wickedness and they drink the wine of violence. Now, many of us read that and we're like, well, I'm not going to get on that path. That's dumb. I'm not going to get on that path. But there's a reason why Solomon is warning these young men about that path. And the reason he's warning them about that path is that nobody wants to get on that path. No one thinks they're going to take that path. And yet that path is deceptively easy to get on. When he describes people like this and we think, well, I don't want that. He says in verse 16, they cannot sleep unless they've done wrong. They are robbed of sleep unless they've made someone stumble. Like whatever keeps you awake at night is like kind of what you're obsessed with. It's what you think a lot about. It's what consumes you if it keeps you awake at night. And none of us read that and go like, yeah, that's who I want to be. And yet what he's describing there is people who are way down the path. He's describing the destination of that path. So, how do you think that path starts? It doesn't start with going, I'm going to wake up in the middle of the night and bring someone down. It doesn't go like, I'm going to eat the bread of wickedness and drink the wine of violence. It's not how you start down that path. How you start down that path is you just nurse a little bit of bitterness at someone who wronged you. Or you just start to feel a little sorry for yourself. Or you compare yourself to other people and you think like, man, I've got to like always stay one step ahead. Like I can't feel good about myself as long as someone is doing better than me. As long as there's someone more talented or someone who's achieving a little bit more, I can't rest. I always need to win. Or if every time you get into a conflict, Like you need to be proven right and you need to get the last word and you need to blame shift and it's always someone else's problem and you just kind of repeat that over and over again. That's how you start down that path. Or every opportunity you have to spread just a bad word about someone else, you take that. Or if you're like daydreaming right now about your enemy one day getting their comeuppance, you travel that path step by step, by step, by step, by step. And you start down that path with one choice. You start down that path with one choice, and then that choice becomes another choice, and that becomes another choice. That's why he's warning you about it. Because no one wants to wind up at the end of that path, but it's deceptively simple. It's deceptively simple to start down it, which is why he goes, don't even enter it. Be aware of what the first step looks like. Don't even enter it. Pass on by. He says in verse 19, the way of the wicked is like deep darkness. They do not know over what they stumble. And this is talking about confusion. Like they literally don't know what they've stumbled over. So they misassign the reason for all the problems that they're encountering in life. They don't have an accurate view of themselves and other people. Now, here's a little parentheses. If you've ever struggled, like many people do in kind of a city like ours, if you've ever struggled with this Christian teaching, really comes from Jesus, on eternal punishment. If you ever struggle with that, this is actually helpful to you. You know, Jesus taught that some people spend eternity forever outside of the presence of God, outside of what Jesus called his kingdom. Like one day God's going to come and he's going to turn the whole world into a world full of justice and beauty and righteousness and life and love, and it's going to be diverse. It's going to be people of every tongue, tribe, and nation, which is probably why you ought to understand race and ethnicity now. And then he says there's going to be some people who aren't in that kingdom. God's going to put them in outside of that kingdom. He's going to have to put them outside of that kingdom to protect the goodness of that kingdom from them. Jesus called it outer darkness. He sometimes called it fire. He sometimes called it Gehenna, which is where we get our English translation hell. And many people are like repulsed by that idea. And that repulsion is understandable if what Jesus was teaching is that one day God is going to show up and he's going to say to some people, sorry, too late for you, off to hell you go. You didn't believe the right things when you were alive. But that's not what he teaches. He teaches that is a destination that is a fitting conclusion to a path that you've willingly traveled. He teaches that there's people who have step by step by step by step by step by step by step, just in the steps and the choices they've made, they've demonstrated they don't want a world where someone is more glorious than them. They don't want a world where someone is the center of attention that's not them. They don't want to live in a world where someone is wealthier than them. They don't want to live in a world with people who aren't like them. They don't want a world that's full of purity and that's full of justice. It's just not the world they want. It's not the God they want. Every choice and every decision we make is a step. So one of the best thinkers to get a hold of this was C.S. Lewis. And he had a thought experiment that went like this. He said, what if your soul, which is like the essence of who you are, what if it really does go on forever on a path? What if the 70 or 80 years that we're kind of given today, what if that's so significant that we really do travel a path, even after we die? Here's what he said. Christianity asserts that we are going on forever, and that must either be true or false. Now, there are many good things. There are a good many things that wouldn't be worth bothering about if I was only going to live 80 years or so. But I had better bother about if I'm going to go on living forever. Perhaps my bad temper or my jealousy are getting worse so gradually that the increase in my lifetime will not be very noticeable, but it might be absolute hell in a million years. In fact, if Christianity is true, hell is precisely the correct technical term for it. Hell begins with a grumbling mood, always complaining, always blaming others, but you're still distinct from it. You may even criticize it in yourself and wish you could stop it, but there may come a day when you can no longer do so. Then there will be no you left to criticize the mood or even to enjoy the mood, but just the grumble itself going on and on forever like a machine. It's not a question of God sending us to hell. In every one of us, there's something growing up that will be hell unless it's nipped in the bud. Now, Proverbs describes the other path, which is in verse 18. But the path of the righteous is like the light of dawn, which shines brighter and brighter until full day. In the same way that nursing bitterness or spreading a bad word about someone is not going to suddenly take you down into deep darkness to where you eat the bread of violence and drink the wine of wickedness, the path of the righteous is not going to suddenly make your life perfect and pain-free and trouble-free. But as you go gradually down that path, it gets brighter and it gets brighter and it gets brighter. It's like the season we're living in. It's not suddenly going to be spring and it's not going to be summer tomorrow, but you are going to get 2 more minutes of daylight tomorrow and 2 more minutes after that and 2 more minutes after that and 2 more minutes after that. Until finally, when you drive home from work, it won't be dark. And the flowers will start to bloom. And it'll be the middle of summer. And you'll be wearing shorts and flip-flops, even though we do that year-round in Colorado. That's the principle. That's the principle of the path. You are in motion. You are headed somewhere. You are going somewhere. And you are becoming somebody. You're becoming a certain kind of person. Even if you don't think you are, you are. You're, whew. And where you wind up is determined by the path that you're on. So how do you get on the path? Now, some of us right now, we might be thinking like, okay, I know some things I need to do. I know some changes. I know some new choices. I know a different direction I need to travel. I know some things I need to stop. I know some things I need to start. That's great. If the Lord is putting something, we invite you to be present here. So if he's putting something on your mind right now that you're like, man, that's the step I need to take. Man, listen to that. But I want to show you one more thing. Proverbs, remember, is really, really sophisticated. So the next paragraph is not just going to say, so just start doing the right thing, start living the right way, start traveling the right path. It's actually going to teach you another principle that's essential to the path. Look at verse 20. My son, be attentive to my words. Incline your ear to my sayings. Let them not escape from your sight. Keep them within your heart. For they are life to those who find them and healing to all their flesh. Keep your heart with all vigilance, for from it flow the springs of life. Put away from you crooked speech and put devious talk far from you. Let your eyes look directly forward and your gaze be straight before you. Ponder the path of your feet. Then all your ways will be sure. Do not swerve to the right or to the left. Turn your foot away from evil. So he's talking about making good choices. But did you notice right there in the middle? He talked about these words being kept in your heart. And then he just went on to say, keep your heart with all vigilance, for from it flow the springs of life. Verse 23. Ponder your path is to keep your heart with all vigilance. The heart is the center of who you are. And Proverbs said, what happens in your life springs up out of your heart, and the path you choose springs up out of your heart. Now, here's why this is so important. When I was 11 years old, my family moved to a new city. And it was the middle of summer, and I was having trouble making friends, probably because I didn't see anyone except my brothers. And so my mom and my dad decided that I should join the Boy Scouts so that I could meet some people. And so they convinced me to join the Boy Scouts, and I was a little skeptical, but once I got to the Boy Scouts, I'm like, this is totally my jam, because the way the Boy Scouts work is you earn merit badges. You complete activities, and they give you a little badge at the end of it, and then you progress through the ranks. And I'm totally made to earn badges and progress through the ranks. Like that's just kind of who I am. And then I kind of toughened me up by putting me outdoors a lot. So that was good for me too. And I made a lot of friends. And I actually progressed because I'm kind of made to earn badges and progress. I actually progressed through the ranks pretty quickly. And then I figured out. I mean, I could see this when I was 11. I figured out it's not cool to be in the Boy Scouts when you're like 15, 16. Starting to drive and date, and so I want to get done and get out of here. And so I was on the fast track. I was on the Boy Scout fast track, basically. I was a ladder climber, and yet there was one merit badge that was like an obstacle to me progressing through the Boy Scouts. I could not earn this merit badge. I tried and failed 3 times before I earned this merit badge. Didn't get it till my 4th time. And they basically had to find me a workaround to get through it. Now, this merit badge was called orienteering. Orienteering means finding your way. And the way orienteering worked is, this is way before GPS, they taught you to use a topographic map and a compass to find your way in the wilderness. So you would go to these seminars, you would learn how to use a compass, you would learn how to read a topo map, and then to earn the merit badge, you had to complete the orienteering exercise. They would take you out into the wilderness. They would give you some instructions. They would give you a map of that area you were in. They would give you a compass, and they gave you some instructions. The instructions would say, now, you want to walk 200 paces this way, then you want to walk so many paces this way, and you have to, at every point along the way, you have to use your compass and find your way, and you had to wind up within a certain, area in order to have successfully complete the orienteering exercise. The first time I did it, I wound up 1 mile away from where I was supposed to be. Now, here's the problem. I have a terrible internal sense of direction. In fact, even if you give me an iPhone and a GPS, I will turn the wrong way. I'll map out the route, and then I'll turn left when I should turn right. This is why when Google Maps invented voice guidance, and they're like, turn left, I'm like, oh, that was like the greatest invention of my life, because then I didn't have to figure out on the map which way left was. I just have a terrible sense of direction. The second time they sent me out on the orienteering exercise, I wound up a half mile away from where I was supposed to be. The third time, I wound up a quarter mile away from where I was supposed to be. You still don't get credit if you wind up a quarter mile away. So finally, they had to send me out with someone else, and he basically completed the orienteering exercise, which is actually a great proverb in its own, right? So here was the problem. Even though I had a map, and even though I had a tool, my internal sense of direction was so bad that it kept overriding the map and the tool. Even though I had instructions on what I was supposed to do, and I had a map that matched with those instructions, and I had a compass to help me figure out those instructions, I had all the tools at my disposal. I have such a bad internal sense of direction that somewhere along the way, I always fouled it up. My internal sense of direction trumped what I knew to be true, and it trumped my tools, and it trumped my map. So here's what Solomon knows. Your heart is so powerful. It will trump your willpower. It will trump your knowledge. It will trump your tools. You've probably had this experience. I've had this experience. I've memorized things in here and then done the opposite of them. What is that? That's my heart. Solomon knows your heart is the deep place from which your decisions and your choices and your preferences flow. It is your internal compass, and your heart is going to direct you to paths. And so even if you know, even if you understand, even if you memorize, even if you have tools, your heart your heart is going to choose a path. So you're always in motion. You're always going somewhere. Your life is always headed somewhere. You're always becoming someone. You're always moving down a path, and you're moving down a path that your heart has chosen. So you're actually always becoming what's in your heart, which is why he says, keep your heart with all vigilance, for out of it flows the springs of life. We're going to have a whole mini-series on the heart coming up this spring, so we just got a little introduction there. But how do you get a new heart? That's where Proverbs leaves us. Maybe the Lord has put on your mind and he's brought to mind, like, I need to do this, or I need to change direction here, or I need to take a step here. And if he's brought that to mind, listen to that. But I hope he's also bringing this question to mind. How do I get my heart right? Here's something that Jesus taught in John chapter 7. He talked a lot about the heart. And he said this in John chapter 7, verse 37. He said, on the last day of the feast, they had this feast in Jerusalem. On the great day, Jesus stood up and he cried out, if anyone thirst, let him come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me, as the scripture has said, out of his heart will flow rivers of living water. Whoever believes in me will have their heart reoriented in a way that up out of that heart will flow springs, or Jesus intensified the metaphor, rivers that are powerful enough to redirect your heart in the way of life. Now, this he said about the Spirit, the Holy Spirit, whom those who believed in him were to receive. He said this before his death and resurrection. You live after his death and resurrection, which means if you have believed in him, you have received that Spirit. That Spirit is remaking your heart. For as yet the Spirit had not been given, because Jesus was not yet glorified, but now it has been given. So we have something even better than Proverbs. We have a promise of Jesus that if you come to him and believe in him, he'll put his Spirit within you, and that Spirit will reorient and redirect your heart and make your heart new. And then a few chapters later in John, this is right at the end of Jesus' ministry, he said this to his disciples as they were starting to fret over him leaving them and going to the cross. He said, let not your hearts be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, I would not have told you that I'm going to go and prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and will take you to myself, that where I am, you may be also. And you know the way to where I'm going. And Thomas, who's like the guy in the Bible who asks like the skeptical question that you're afraid to ask, but you're glad someone asked. Thomas said to him, Lord, we don't know where you are going. How can we know the way? Jesus said to him, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. I'm the path. If you had known me, you wouldn't have known the Father also. From now on, you do know him and you have seen him. Jesus says, I'll give you a new heart. I'll put my Spirit within you. I'll give you a new heart. Out of that new heart will flow springs of living water. That new heart will direct you on a new path. That path is me. I am the path. I am the way to know the Father. And then he gives us a guarantee. And if you're on the path with me, and if you've received the Spirit from me, you will arrive at the place where you see the Father. Because the principle of the path that was taught way back in Proverbs still holds true and applies to Jesus. Let's pray. Father, we love you. Thank you for fathering us. Thank you for giving us wise instruction. And I think of Solomon here giving his son instruction. And then I think of Jesus who went him one better and said, I'm not just going to give you some instructions and some proverbs. I'm actually going to give you myself. And I'm going to be the way, and I'm going to be the truth. I'm going to be the path for you. I pray today that you would help us to believe that promise from Jesus. And I pray we would see the beauty of believing that promise from Jesus, that he promises us, if we believe in him, he'll put his Spirit within us that will make our heart new, and he'll be a path, and he'll take us to the Father. What an incredible promise. So some of us today are maybe thinking, I don't know if I've ever put my trust in Jesus. And so we're just going to do that right now. We're going to tell you. We want to put our trust in him. We want to receive his death as forgiveness of our sin. And we want to receive his resurrection, his life. And we're now trusting him as our path. And those of us who have done that, we're just being reminded of the riches we have in him. And I pray that your Spirit would speak to each one of our hearts now and bring out the new heart so that we can stay close to the good path, who is a person, who is Jesus. And we end this prayer the way we prayed right before the sermon, that in experiencing the work of the Spirit and being on the path with Jesus, we would know you and you would be present with us. We ask it in his name and by his Spirit. Amen.